Hello everyone, welcome to Percussionology. My name is Rob Sullins, where I'll be teaching percussion with teachers and students in mind. Today what I wanted to do is just talk a little bit about how I teach my students 16th notes, alternating strokes, single stroke roll, however you want to think of it, and some of the pitfalls that I run into with beginning percussionists and what they tend to do when they're learning 16th notes for the very first time. What I like to usually start with is making sure that the students are comfortable in counting 16th notes before we play it. The system that we use here is 1T tetas. I know a lot of people are familiar with 1E andas. Whatever your counting system is, making sure the students can count one measure. We usually have them count 1E and a, 2E and a, 3E and a, 4E and a 1. But the main idea is making sure that they can internalize the pulse so that we can eventually get that to line up with the hands. Once they're pretty comfortable doing that as a class, what we do is play as a group and we just try to sit there and see what happens. Usually it's not very together, but it kind of gives them a sense of like how fast their hands need to move. Once we've done that a couple times, what I'll do is have them start counting out loud while they play. So we'll be starting in an up position and we will be counting 1E and a, 2E and a, 3E and a, 4E and a 1. Pretty standard setup. What usually happens is students start to squeeze the stick. So if we kind of go back to our 8 on a hand model, which is teaching a nice full stroke, getting a nice rebound off the pad. What we want to try to get students to understand is what we apply to 8 on a hand is this nice relaxed approach is the same thing that we do when we play 16th notes. Usually what I'll do is I'll play the 16th notes and demonstrate to the students by playing one stick on the pad and one on my leg. So they can get a sense to see that the stroke is nice and relaxed in the same way, and I'll do the other way. And I usually show them first or ask them a question and be like, what does this exercise sound like? And most of them, somebody will always say, it sounds like 8 on a hand. Then what I do is maybe play double stops and then get to show the students that basically that the 16th notes are just kind of 8 on a hand separated by one note. The next thing that I do is try to make sure that they understand that everything's supposed to relax. Most students will squeeze the stick and they'll start downstroking. You can see that it changes the pitch of the stick. We want the stick and the tone of the stick to resonate instead of if you squeeze, you're going to get a kind of a dead sound. So we want to make sure that that stick rebounds. Something else that students usually have a tendency to do is play higher as they're playing faster. And this is completely against everything that we do in percussion. The number one rule is when we play faster is the stick height should come down. When they're playing these 16th notes, usually if we're starting playing 8 on a hand, we're playing at a nice fortissimo level, we're getting a nice big full wrist turn. And when we go to 16th notes, what the first thing I tell them is like, okay, we're gonna play at a forte. So we bring it down a couple of inches, and usually by the students doing this, this allows them to play a little bit more relaxed and a little less energy. So we're usually coming somewhere down here. So I'll be having them count 1T theta, 2T theta, 3T theta, 4T theta, 1. And even if it's still, I still see students tensing up, I'll have them play even lower, just to try to get it nice and relaxed and let them understand that everything's supposed to bounce. What I'll see sometimes is students going higher, and you'll see something like this. I'll usually see those students slowing down and they're squeezing the stick and they just don't have the energy or the muscle strength to be able to do that. One thing that I try to make clear to the students is that when they count, whatever counting system you have, we're trying to get the numbers and the syllables to line up exactly with what they say. So if they say 1, I want it to be whoa. So the stick is hitting the pad as soon as they have the initial articulation, and I'll have them do that so they're like 1E and a, 2E and a. Or if you're using tetas, 1T teta, 2T teta, and making sure they're very clear that the syllable and the stick hitting the pad lines up. Usually that will fix any kind of the counting issues that they might have. You'll see some alignment issues when they're counting and they start playing where they're just concentrating on the counting and they're just concentrating on playing. Some other things to take into consideration just in general in percussion is that when students are playing and when they try to play faster, what they want to do is they want to try to squeeze the stick. If you take your hand out in front of you and you take your hand and squeeze your index finger and thumb and then try to move your wrist you'll notice that it is inhibited by the tension between just these two fingers. We want to make sure that I have all the students squeeze their finger, try to bend their wrist, usually do with hands, and then I tell them to relax their hand. And just by doing this, you can see the difference in tension in the forearm and the hand, and try to get students to understand that when they're holding that stick, that the pressure between the thumb and the index finger should be relaxed enough that it's not inhibiting the motion of the stick. It's really important that if you see students that are kind of becoming really stiff when they play, a lot of that is probably coming from this pressure between the thumb and the index finger. It is where the fulcrum is, but again, a term that I use all the time for students is to make sure that their hands are soft. We use the term relax all the time. Sometimes the younger students don't understand that term as well as we would hope. So using things like playing soft, or like I tell my students, when they're holding the stick, make sure they feel like they're holding an egg and they're not crushing the egg. So again, going back to the beginning, bring the sticks down, making sure that we're counting while we're playing, and making sure that the syllables are lining up with what we're playing. 1 T teta, 2 T teta, 3 T teta, 4 T teta, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1. The last thing that I want to do is try to make sure, if we're in a class setting, is that the students understand what it sounds like when students play together, and give them credit for when it does line up. Another thing you want to take into consideration is we're always doing this with a foot tap, and the one thing I really try to concentrate on with the students is that the numbers are lining up with the groupings of the notes. So when they're tapping their foot, that the foot tap is down every time that they say a number. So it's 1 T teta, 2 T teta, 3 T teta, 4 T teta, 1. The tendency is that when students play large groupings of notes or faster groupings of notes, is they're going to want to try to speed their foot up. And I usually just have them try to concentrate on the number instead of trying to get a down up foot tap and thinking about how the and or the take count lines up on the and. It's usually too much for the students to process, and I just try to get them to line up on the downbeats. Sometimes it's helpful to change the counting system. Students are maybe a little bit more comfortable with counting 1, 2, 3, 4s, and if you tell them that the foot's going to line up every time that they say 1 when they're playing, so it would be something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And they can do the foot tap that way. It's cognitively, it's found that it's a little bit easier, and it's something they can grasp onto, especially when you're introducing a new counting system at the same time and saying 1 E and a. We will count 1 E and or 1 T teta every day before they get into actually playing. As they become more comfortable with that counting system, they'll have a better chance of getting their hands to line up. So it takes some time. It's not gonna happen in one class sitting. And again, playing lower, making sure that foot tap's happening and that they're not squeezing the stick, and just getting a nice rebound legato stroke. Again, I hope that my comments are helpful to everybody. You guys can subscribe below. Check me out on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. The username for all those accounts are all percussionology. Again, my name is Rob Sullins. Hope you guys enjoy, and I'll be back soon with some more information.